Good morning and welcome to today's Emergency Nerds, called because the President of the United States is officially a convicted felon. Um, this sort of felt like an exercise in futility, but it does matter, at least in some ways. And we know it does because Donald fought so hard to avoid having to face this moment. Um, so after prosecutors made it clear that Donald is and will be forevermore a convicted felon, Donald got to, well, first his attorney uh, got to say his piece. Todd Blanche just pointed out to those of us who didn't already know that has all been very sad for Donald Trump. And then Donald, who appeared remotely, took to the microphone to whine. I know that's shocking. He was, by all accounts, from people in the courtroom, sounding very aggrieved and needy. And he used this is usually an opportunity for convicted felons to make the case that they are contrite and that they understand why they were convicted. They take responsibility, and they usually want to appeal to the judge's better natures by demonstrating that they understand what they did was wrong. No, not so Donald Trump. First of all, he revisited, as he is wont to do, the election, saying rather, I got the largest number of votes by far by any Republican history and won, as you know, all 7 swing states, won conclusively all 7 swing states. And then he went on to claim falsely that he had done nothing wrong, and that the charges were bogus. And for this, he got indicted, quote, it's terrible, actually, unquote, and has done damage to his reputation. To which I say, how? How? And then he wandered around a lot, and then he finally got back to the matter at hand, saying, quote, the people of this country understand what's going on. This has been a weaponization of government. They call it lawfare, unquote. By the way, anybody who taught him that word owes us all like hazard pay. And then he ended by saying, quote, I'd just like to explain that I've been treated unfairly, unquote, says the man who has just been elected to be president of the United States. What a punishment. How unfair. Well, it is unfair. It's unfair to us, that's for sure. So it was more rally speech than convicted felon asking for lenience. But again, one of the problems here is like, what lenience of what? There is no sentence. Justice Juan Merchan has made it clear that there will be no prison term, there will be no probation, there will be no fine, there will be no community service. And I get it. I mean, people have said that these things would be impossible, if unwieldy, if not impossible. I'm not entirely sure why the guy couldn't be fined. That's that I don't understand. But anyway, does it matter that it would be unwieldy? I mean, so basically what we learned today, besides the fact that you can be a convicted felon and be sworn in to be president of the United States 10 days later, we learned that, or I shouldn't say we learned, we now know unequivocally. Some of us have known this for a while, but it is now unequivocal because we have a real instance of this. This is not some concept that can be vague to people who weren't paying attention anymore. one person at least is above the law. There are two systems of justice in the United States of America. Let's hear what Justice Merchan had to say. Well, I'm going to read it to you. So the task is always difficult and deserving of careful consideration. I assume he's talking about sentencing. However, never before has this court been presented with such a unique and remarkable set of circumstances. It can be viewed fairly that this was a truly extraordinary case. He also added that it was a paradox. Once the courtroom doors were closed, the trial was no more special, unique, or extraordinary than any other of the 32 criminal trials that took place in this courthouse at the same time. It is the legal protections afforded to the office of the President of the United States that are extraordinary, not the occupant. Well, you got that right. He said that the fact that Donald is going to be, once again, in the office of the presidency is not a mitigating factor, but a legal mandate that, quote, pursuant to the rule of law, this court must respect and follow. One power they do not provide is the power to erase a jury verdict. And then why is beyond my comprehension. He wishes Donald Godspeed in his second term in office. Really? You know, that's the kind of thing that makes me friggin' crazy. Would anybody have noticed if Merchan had not wished Donald Godspeed? No, nobody would have expected him to. He just let a convicted felon off with no punishment whatsoever and then treated him like he was not a convicted felon. When have you ever seen that before? I mean, we have seen it before in some cases, but here we go again. It's hard to feel good about this, honestly. However, I thought it was interesting that the Supreme Court allowed this to happen. Less interesting, of course, and more concerning that there are actually 4 justices on the Supreme Court who thought that Donald should not be sentenced today. The usual suspects: Alito, Thomas, Gorsuch, and Kavanaugh. Roberts and Barrett joined with Sotomayor, Jackson, and Kagan to allow these proceedings today to go on. But, it should have been 9-0. Actually, it should have been 8-0 because Alito, who had a lovely chat with Donald a couple of days ago, should have recused himself. But he's such an arrogant, above it all, holier than thou ass that, of course, he would never recuse himself, no matter how corrupt his participation in this matter might have appeared. So I guess this is, this is the end of the Herculean attempts, or maybe I think Sisyphusian might be a better descriptor, to hold Donald accountable for his many, many, many egregious crimes against New York, against individuals, against the United States of America. However, we still have the release of at least one volume of Jack Smith's report to look forward to. Yesterday, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals brushed aside the corrupt personal pocket judge of Donald Trump's Aileen Cannon's insistence that none of the reports be made public. So Merrick Garland can release one volume of the report. That would be the generous volume of the report on, I think, Monday, because it had to be 3 days after the ruling. Who knows why? And as far as I'm aware, the completely useless. Actually, that is not fair. It's not fair to say Mershon is useless. He has been of great use to Donald Trump. He has been a great assistant to Donald Trump, a great enabler of Donald Trump's efforts to evade accountability. So thank you, Merrick Garland. I didn't mean to insult you by saying you were useless. And useless to us. In fact, you've inflicted such great harm upon this country that I think it's going to take a while to figure out just how deep those wounds are. Anyway, it still remains to be seen what's going to be happening with the other volume, which has to do with the case over which the corrupt judge Aileen Cannon presided so horrifically, a case that she dismissed without cause. Richard Stengel on Twitter made a great suggestion that Jack Smith should just drop the charges against Donald's co-defendants, because like, why go after them if Donald was the chief perpetrator of the crime and the co-defendants were just accessories kind of after the fact. So like, why go after them if going after them means that the American people won't see the contents of that report? So dismiss the charges, and then there is literally no argument to be made not to release that report. We have 10 days. The clock is ticking. So just, a reminder, and it isn't, well, simultaneously, it's not nothing, and it's the only thing we have right now, that the president-elect of the United States was sentenced to an unconditional discharge, which means that he is the first president in our history. He must be so proud to have been sentenced for a criminal conviction. Yes, in 10 days, in its infinite wisdom, the United States of America will be swearing in a convicted felon who will have received absolutely no punishment, not even a slap on the wrist. No, Godspeed, Donald, Godspeed. The times in which we live. You guys ever feel like you're living through history? Yeah, I do. I don't like it. I don't like it at all. But here we are. All right. I don't know what's still going on in the courtroom. I have to be honest with you. I much preferred it when he walked into the courtroom and the police officer didn't hold the door for him and it kind of slammed Donald in the face. That was much more fun. But I'm also a little surprised that he didn't have to attend in person. I don't know. It's kind of a big deal. Although, honestly, Mershon kind of like took all the drama out of it by telling us in advance that he wasn't going to be imposing any kind of sentence. I assume, when they do come out, the lawyers will have their say. Sorry, I'm just checking on something. I want to get an update on what is still going on. That's right. Thank you, Susan. Yeah, they had announced earlier today that the audio of the court proceedings will be released. So we get to hear Donald whine. That'll be new. No, but I think it's important for the record to have this. I continue to be mystified that we do not have cameras in the courtroom. I think it does us a great disservice. I think there's a way to do it without turning the proceedings into a circus. I think Mershon was capable of doing that. Sorry, guys. I'm just trying to find something. So yeah, Donald Trump, convicted felon, found guilty by a jury of his peers for 34 criminal counts. Similar counts, similar charges that were brought against Michael Cohen, for which Michael Cohen served a couple of years in prison for committing a crime on behalf of the other person who was committing the crime. And I mean, it's not a perfect analogy, and I'm not equating anybody with being a hitman in this context, but it's the only analogy I can think of. It is like throwing the hitman in prison, but not the person who hired him. Okay. It's a little weird. So guilty, 34 felony counts and sentenced to nothing. But you have to wonder why. And I know that partially this is characterological, right? Donald just is litigious by nature. He it's really weird. He hates losing, which is odd because he's such a freaking loser. Like in some sense, like he loses all the time. Like the only time he actually wins is when he's cheating or somebody else is cheating for him, or the deck has been stacked so much in his favor, or things have been rigged to help him win, or whatever. That you would think that he would just embrace the loserdom. But he did go to extraordinary lengths. I mean, first of all, let's be real. He's not paying for any of this. He's ripping off his followers. His followers are paying for all of this. Or maybe the American taxpayer. That wouldn't surprise me. Actually, we are, because the prosecutors have been forced to answer to everything. So basically, when Donald's lawyer submitted a brief to Mershon to delay today's proceedings, basically indefinitely, and Mershon said no, instead of going through the system, because remember, this is a New York State case. This is not a federal case. So there's a process. There are different levels of the judiciary in every state. So instead of going through that process, the whiny baby went straight to the Supreme Court, probably not just to save time, because although there wasn't much, although as we've seen, when Supreme Court justices want to act quickly, they don't have to wait a year and a half to get around to making a ruling. But he was probably banking on the fact that, at least in his mind, the majority of the Supreme Court owes him one, and he figured that he would get a positive ruling. It turns out he simultaneously appealed to the New York Appellate Division, and while the Supreme Court was weighing the issue, the New York Appeals Court declined to, or I guess, rebuff Donald's request. So it would have gone to the Supreme Court anyway. And again, within an hour of the ask, there was a hearing. Appalling. And Donald's attorneys made their case, and then the prosecutors have until yesterday morning to make their case. You guys want to see a picture of how happy Donald looked during his Zoom sentencing? We have that for you. Let's check it out. Wake up. Lighting is very flattering. All right, we don't need to look at that anymore. Anyway, so Bragg made his case, and essentially what Bragg said was, the sentencing needs to happen. This needs to be official. And by the way, he's receiving no punishment anyway. So what's the problem? And as I mentioned earlier, and kind of you know what? this is sort of sums up where we are in some ways. Uh, the fact that we realized there was a very real possibility that the corrupt, illegitimate supermajority of the Supreme Court would delay these proceedings, or worse, just end this thing so that Donald's convictions would not have been entered into the official record. That should shock us because, as I said earlier, this should have been 8-0 with Alito recusing. So the fact that we had to worry about that is kind of mind-blowing. And the fact that some of us were legitimately shocked that the Supreme Court did the right thing, or I should say, 5 out of the 9 justices did the right thing. And by the right thing, I mean the judicially appropriate thing, not like the right versus wrong thing. Although, again, I mean, I need to talk to a lawyer about this, but I also think though that and again, I want somebody to check my work. The right thing would have been for the Supreme Court not to respond at all. Just say, no, we're not hearing this. I think that I don't know. I'll ask one of our many nerd lawyers at some point. So, unfortunately, we're going to be hearing Donald's reaction about this for a long time. And this is something to ponder. So Donald continues to obsess about even the 2016 election sometimes, but particularly about the 2020 election and how he claims it was stolen from him and all of that nonsense. He continues to perpetuate the big lie because he's still, like I said, he can't handle losing. Whereas the media just moves on from stuff. Like, you never hear him referred to as an insurrectionist or an adjudicated rapist or a massive business fraud. Like, in case you've forgotten, and if you have, it's understandable because corporate media just has memory hold this, just as they memory hold the fact that because of Donald's just egregious and purposeful mishandling of the COVID virus, like in excess of 400,000 Americans died needlessly, right? You never hear any of those things mentioned. It's just, he's the candidate, he's the president-elect, whatever. So, I mean, in 10 days, will corporate media even remember that he's a convicted felon? I don't know. Which sort of, again, begs the question, like, why Donald was so insistent that this not happen. I think it's just that his disastrously fragile ego and need to grandstand and be aggrieved while whining very prolifically. And, let's not forget, all of this is happening in the context of the LA fires, which continue to burn. I think there are 5 separate fires now. 2 of them have not been contained at all. There might have actually been a new area that just burst into flame. I mean, it's just a nightmare. And, probably the only good thing about his being at this hearing was it gave him less time to spread disinformation and conspiracy theories and undermine Governor Newsom, who's leading the effort out there. So it gave Donald an hour or two where he did not have the opportunity to do that. I mean, his behavior has been utterly despicable and totally expected. Actually, I made a video about how Donald handles crises that's going to be dropping later today because it's unfortunately relevant. 10 days. 10 days. during which we're already remembering in our bones what it was like during that 4 years and what it's going to be like again. And I think we really are going to have to do some digging into why, now that the smoke from the election is, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. Now that we have a little bit more clarity. I mean, I remember in the immediate aftermath of the election, I felt like I had a lot of clarity. But I have much more clarity now. And I think we're going to have to start talking about what we need to do differently. We as citizens, but also we as Democrats, and we need to figure out how to get the leaders in the Democratic Party, elected officials in the Democratic Party, to start playing the game that's being played by Republicans instead of some, anachronistic retrospective in which they're playing by rules that do not exist. We just found out that Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania, who fancies himself the new Kirsten Sinema, I guess, is going to Mar-a-Lago to meet with Donald, to which I say, why? Anyway, Brian Karem is joining us, so let's bring Brian in. Or not. There he is. Oh, he's tiny.
Morning.
There you go. No, you're not. First of all, most importantly, how are you guys out there? Everything still okay for you?
Well, let's see. We evacuated our second son, his wife, and the eternally happy grandson and our granddaughter, and we now have we're the evacuation center for eight people, 6 cats, and 4 dogs. So,
wow.
So we're all right.
Okay. Lots of privacy.
Yeah, but we're all doing good, thanks.
So Brian, I don't know if you were, I assume you were following the live tweeting or the proceedings. Kind of anticlimactic. Do you have any insights or perspectives that are different from mine? Because I don't know, I feel a little, even though we knew ahead of time, it still definitely feels like a massive letdown.
Well,
for the rule of law and for justice and accountability.
I was enthused by what the Supreme Court did by saying, 5-4, saying, and it was nice to see that 2 of the conservative justices, including Chief Justice, decided that Donald Trump had to face some music.
Okay, but wait a second, Brian. Though, I mean, should that have been in question? Like, I'm thinking the fact that 4 of them, it should have been not 8-0 because Alito should have recused. So I'm not enthused, or I don't even feel like it's a good sign. I feel like it's
I take my
sign of how
doses.
Okay, you know what? Be enthused. Don't listen to me.
I'm just taking hope. I'm just being hopeful, Mary.
I think that's fair. I'm supposed to do that too. I don't know. I'm feeling a little bit disgusted at the moment, but please be enthused and optimistic and hopeful.
Yeah, well, that you take a look at it, and they shouldn't have even had the case, right? But at least,
of course not.
By 5-4, it renewed a wee bit of faith that perhaps there's some accountability going to happen during the Trump second administration. Not much, mind you. I'm sure there won't be very much, but it just a wee bit of hope. So I take my hope where I can, especially on the mornings when I wake up and see smoke plumes all over the city. So the threat of the apocalypse is real, folks. But other than that, it also shows you just how bit of a wimp Donald Trump is, because he didn't want to face even this tiny little bit of music. He could not face this wee bit of accountability, and he got away scot-free. So to that extent, all things being considered, this is Donald Trump being Donald Trump and getting away with whatever he can for as long as he can, and that hasn't changed.
And Steinglass, Christopher Conroy, Susan Hoffinger, Becky Mangold, Matthew Colangelo, and Catherine Ellis. Good morning, people.
Name of what we need President Trump. hearing via Teams. He's co-located with my partner, Tom Lynch.
All right, good morning, Ms. Bowley. Good morning, Mr. Lynch. Good morning, Mr. Trump.
Good morning.
Although Mr. Bowley has already alluded to it, just for the record, I want to make clear
He's not even there.
Mr. Blanche is appearing virtually with Mr. Trump, and you're currently in Florida, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct, Your Honor.
Okay. Mr. Trump's other attorney, Mr. Bowley, is with us in the courtroom. Pursuant to this court's decision and order dated January 3rd, 2025, Mr. Trump was given the option of appearing virtually, and subsequently counsel for Mr. Trump informed this court that Mr. Trump had elected to waive personal appearance and appear virtually. Decision of sentence in this matter is permitted in New York, and I direct your attention to the matter of People v. Vegas, 72 Miscellaneous 3rd, 1133, 2021. Before turning to the matter of sentencing, I want to confirm that the people and defense counsel have both received copies of the probation report. You have not. I let the record reflect that the people are being handed a copy now. Mr. Bowley is being handed a copy. Why don't we take some time to look at it? Okay? Thank you. While the parties look at the probation report, Mr. Blanche, I'd like to confirm that you received an e-copy of the report.
Yes, Your Honor. We received a copy this morning, and I have it in front of me.
Is there anything about that report that you would like to put on the record?
Nothing other than the fact that it was some of the facts and procedural history, especially involving other cases, are not up to date because of what's happened since the date of the report. But otherwise, given what we expect is happening today, nothing.
Okay, thank you.
So just so you know why there's a pause in the proceedings here, the judge is giving an opportunity to both sets of attorneys to take a look at a report that was handed out, a pre-sentence report. So that is why you are hearing this moment as the prosecution and the defense are taking a look at it. It is not anything wrong with your television or your audio. We'll go back and listen it.
No, Judge, I just need a couple more time, if you don't mind.
While we wait for this pause to finish, Danny Savalos, you're with us now. One of the things people are hearing is the prosecution is going to recommend also a sentence of unconditional discharge. Why would the prosecution recommend that as well?
Because I suspect the prosecution knows it's the only workable sentence in this situation. Consider this. What if the prosecution asked for probation? That would obviously not be completed in 10 days or 7 days. It would take months and months. And now you get into Trump's presidency, and the prosecution knows there's a very strong argument for the fact that a state.
Yeah, well, so while we're waiting, I'd rather hear what you have to say, actually.
Imagine.
Yes, so unconditional. Go ahead, sorry.
No, that's all right. Imagine you're Michael Cohen, and you're sitting there. You had to do jail time for this. He asked you to do it. He's getting an unconditional release so he can go play president. It just tells you who's above the law.
Yeah, I said that earlier, because we knew in advance.
Just a court that any matters relevant to sentencing for the people. Thank you. Judge, where's the preferred place for me to stand?
Wherever you feel comfortable.
The defendant in this case, as you know, stands convicted of 34 counts of falsifying business records in the first degree, all Class E felonies. Each carries a range of authorized sentencing options. An inclination to impose an unconditional discharge. Under all the circumstances of this case, its unique posture and the defendant's status as president-elect, the people recommend a sentence of an unconditional discharge. In finding the defendant guilty in this case, the jury necessarily found unanimously that the defendant falsified 34 separate entries in his business records with the intent to defraud, which included an intent to commit or conceal a conspiracy to promote his own election by unlawful means. Having presided over the trial, Your Honor is very familiar with the conduct, its seriousness, and the overwhelming evidence to support the jury's verdict. I'm certainly not going to rehash that now. In last week's decision on January 3rd, this court referred to the gravamen of the defendant's conduct, his criminal conduct in this case, as constituting, quote, premeditated and continuous deception. The verdict was delivered by a jury that was carefully chosen using an extensive questionnaire based on suggestions from both parties and after thorough questioning of the prospective jurors by both sides. The verdict in this case was unanimous and decisive, and it must be respected. As this court has observed, quote, the sanctity of a jury verdict and the deference that must be accorded to it is a bedrock principle in our nation's jurisprudence. The defendant's conduct before, during, and after this trial also merits consideration. Instead of preserving, protecting, and defending our constitutionally established system of criminal justice, the defendant, the once and future President of the United States, has engaged in a coordinated campaign to undermine its legitimacy. Far from expressing any kind of remorse for his criminal conduct, the defendant has purposefully bred disdain for our judicial institutions and the rule of law. And he's done this to serve his own ends and to encourage others to reject the jury verdict that he finds so distasteful. He has characterized these proceedings as corrupt, rigged, a witch hunt, or a sham too many times to tabulate. The defendant's rhetoric has only ratcheted up since this court's rulings on his motions to dismiss. He has been unrelenting in his unsubstantiated attacks upon this court and its family, individual prosecutors and their families, the witnesses, the grand jury, the trial jury, and the justice system as a whole. The defendant has not only been held in contempt by other jurists in other matters, but this court alone found the defendant in contempt for 10 distinct violations of the order restricting extrajudicial speech. In his legal filings, the defendant has used dangerous rhetoric and leveling accusations of intentionally unlawful and unconstitutional conduct on the part of this court and the prosecution. As this court has noted, the defendant's conduct, quote, constitutes a direct attack on the rule of law itself. Moreover, the defendant has publicly threatened to retaliate against the prosecutors who have sought to hold him accountable in this and other matters, and the courts who have endeavored to fairly and faithfully adjudicate these matters. Such threats are designed to have a chilling effect, to intimidate those who have the responsibility to enforce our laws, in the hopes that they will ignore the defendant's transgressions because they fear that he is simply too powerful to be subjected to the same rule of law as the rest of us. In his 2024 end-of-year report, United States Supreme Court Chief Justice Roberts warned of the dangers of such conduct. Quote, public officials too, regrettably, have engaged in recent attempts to intimidate judges. For example, suggesting political bias in the judge's adverse rulings without credible basis for such allegations, end quote. Chief Justice Robert continued, quote, attempts to intimidate judges for their rulings are inappropriate and should be vigorously opposed. Public officials certainly have a right to criticize the work of the judiciary, but they should be mindful that intemperance in their statements when it comes to judges may prompt dangerous reactions by others. Chief Justice Roberts also spoke of the dangers of disinformation, which are, quote, magnified by social media, which provides a ready channel to instantly spread rumor and false information.
Yeah.
Put simply, this defendant has caused enduring damage to public perception of the criminal justice system and has placed officers of the court in harm's way. In the probation report, which we just received this morning, the author, having interviewed the defendant, noted that the defendant sees himself as above the law and won't accept responsibility for his actions. And that's certainly consistent with everything else that we've seen. Now, in a typical case, both the offense conduct and these other exacerbating factors would impact the appropriate sentence. But in this case, we must be respectful of the office of the presidency and mindful of the fact that the defendant will be inaugurated as president in 10 days. Any undischarged portion of the sentence has the potential to interfere with the defendant's performance of the duties of his office. As a practical matter, the most sensible sentence prior to his inauguration is an unconditional discharge. The court has expressed an inclination to do exactly that because, in the court's words, quote, the most viable solution to ensure finality and allow defendant to pursue his appellate options is to proceed to sentence. Now, as you know, in New York, a conditional discharge is authorized by penal law, quote, if the court, having regard to the nature and circumstances of the offense and to the history, character, and condition of the defendant, is of the opinion that neither the public interest nor the ends of justice would be served by a sentence of imprisonment and that probation supervision is not appropriate. An unconditional discharge is authorized if a conditional discharge is authorized and, quote, if the court is of the opinion that no proper purpose would be served by imposing any condition upon the defendant's release. Because these crimes are felonies, the court must set forth in the record the reasons for its action. The American public has the right to a presidency unencumbered by pending court proceedings or ongoing sentence-related obligations. But imposing this sentence ensures that finality. Sentencing the defendant permits this court to enter judgment, to cement the defendant's status as a convicted felon while he pursues whatever appeals he intends to pursue. And it gives full effect and respect to the jury's verdict while preserving the defendant's ability to govern. People therefore recommend that this court impose a sentence of an unconditional discharge. Thank you.
Thank you. Counsel.
Easy.
Thank you, Your Honor. I very much disagree with much of what the government just said about this case, about the legitimacy of what happened in this courtroom during the trial, and about President Trump's conduct fighting this case from before it was indicted, to while it was indicted, to the jury's verdict, and even to this day. What the government just said presupposes something that we disagree with very much, which was that this was an appropriate case to be brought. It was not. This case, without a doubt, knowing everything we know about the timing of the investigation, the fact that multiple prosecutors looked at the facts of this case, including prosecutors within the district attorney's office in New York County, and made a decision not to bring charges. As the court knows, shortly after President Trump announced his intention to run for re-election, this case was started for what amounted to a third time, which brings us ultimately to where we are today. A lot of what the government just said presupposes that this case is legally appropriate and that the charges that were brought by the people were consistent with the laws of New York. Again, we very much disagree with that, and as everybody has been noted, because it's true, we certainly intend on appealing that. And it's not, by the way, just counsel and President Trump that feels that way. There's many, many, many legal experts that share the same views that I just said, which is that legally this case should not have been brought, both based on the facts that were established at trial and also the legal basis for which they were brought. But it's also not just the legal experts, not just counsel, and not just President Trump, but the majority of the American people also agree that this case should not have been brought. I mean, the interesting thing about the fact that there was a trial for the first time in our history, a criminal trial during an election season, is that the American voters got a chance to see and decide for themselves whether this is the kind of case that should have been brought. And they decided. And that's why in 10 days, President Trump is going to assume the office of the President of the United States. And certainly we're here for the court to sentence President Trump to an unconditional discharge. And for that, it's a very sad day. It's a sad day for President Trump and his family and friends. But it's also, in counsel's view, a sad day for this country, because this was a case, without a doubt, that was brought by a district attorney who promised that he would go after President Trump if elected, and felt like he had to go through with that promise. And so that's sad. And I hope, and I know that President Trump shares this view, that this will never happen again in this country. And so we certainly understand where we are today. We very much intend on pursuing an appeal of this verdict and what happened during this investigation. And we certainly believe that the only appropriate sentence, if one's to be imposed at all, which we very much believe it shouldn't be, and that the case should be dismissed, is a sentence of unconditional discharge. Thank you.
Thank you. Would your client like to be heard?
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. This has been a very terrible experience. I think it's been a tremendous setback for New York and the New York court system. This is a case that Alvin Bragg did not want to bring. He thought it was, from what I read and from what I hear, inappropriately handled before he got there. A gentleman from a law firm came in and acted as a district attorney, and that gentleman, from what I heard, was a criminal or almost criminal in what he did. It was very inappropriate. It was somebody involved with my political opponent. Part of the records that we're talking about, they're saying, I just noticed where he said I was falsifying business records. Well, the falsification of business records, as they said, was calling a legal expense in the books where everybody could see them, a legal expense. In other words, that legal fees or legal expense were put down as legal expense by accountants. They weren't put down by me, they were put down by accountants. I didn't call them construction, concrete work, I didn't call them electrical work, I didn't call them anything. They called a legal fee or a legal expense, and for this, I got indicted. It's incredible, actually. Now,
Convicted.
my attorney alluded to it. The top legal scholars and legal pundits in this country, the ones that are quoted all the time on television, that are making their views felt, and highly respected people, have said, everyone, virtually everyone that I know of, haven't seen any to the contrary, not one. And none of these people are not exactly friends of mine, to put it mildly. But they all said this is a case that should have never been brought. It's an injustice of justice. Very respected Jonathan Turley, Andy McCarthy, Judge David Rifkin, a wonderful man who just passed away, by the way, Greg Jarrett, Ellie Honig from CNN, of all places. CNN said that, Paul Ingratian,
Not
Alan Dershowitz, they all said this is not a case that should be brought. It's not, think about it, legal expenses are down as legal expenses, and I get indicted for business records. Everybody should be so accurate. It's been a political witch hunt. It was done to damage my reputation so that I'd lose the election, and obviously that didn't work. And the people of our country got to see this firsthand because they watched the case in your courtroom. They got to see this firsthand, and then they voted, and I won and got the largest number of votes by far of any Republican candidate in history, and won, as you know, all 7 swing states, won conclusively all 7 swing states, and won the popular vote by millions and millions of votes. And they've been watching you try, so they understood it. I wasn't allowed to use the lawyer-client privilege or the reliance on counsel. I had a lawyer that made this deal, and he admitted that. And he was also a totally discredited person. We weren't allowed to use the information from the Southern District that totally discredited him. It wasn't allowed to be put in. And that was terrible, unbelievable. And this is a man who's got no standing. He's been disbarred on other matters, unrelated. And he was allowed to talk as though he were George Washington. But he's not George Washington. He shouldn't have been allowed. The Southern District did a book of approximately 28 pages where I've never seen anything like it. They excoriated him. You wouldn't let it be put into evidence. So he was able to testify as a witness, and I think it's a disgrace to the system. I was under a gag order. I'm the first president in history that was under a gag order where I couldn't talk about aspects of the case that are very important. I guess I'm still under, so probably I won't do it now. I assume I'm still under a gag order. But the fact is that I'm totally innocent. I did nothing wrong. They talked about business records, and the business records were extremely accurately counted. I had nothing to do with them. That was done by an accountant or a bookkeeper who I think gave very credible testimony and was corroborated by everybody that was asked. And with all that's happening in our country today, with a city that's burning to the ground, one of our largest, most important cities burning to the ground, with wars that are uncontrollably going on, with all of the problems of inflation and attacks
The jury's
on
fault. LA is
countries and all of the horrible things that are going on. I got indicted over calling a legal expense a legal expense. It was called a legal expense. I just want to say I think it's an embarrassment to New York, and New York has a lot of problems, but this is a great embarrassment. I believe that this and other cases that were brought, as you know, the DOJ is very much involved in this case. It's because that's the political opponent they're talking about. The DOJ is very involved. You have a gentleman sitting right there from the DOJ who was from the DOJ's office. He was also involved with the New York State Attorney General's case. And he went from there to here. He went around and did what he had to do. He got them to move on me. But in the meantime, I won the election in a massive landslide. And the people of this country understand what's gone on. This has been a weaponization of government. They call it lawfare. Never happened to any extent like this, but never happened in our country before. And I'd just like to explain that I was treated very, very unfairly. And I thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump, you appear before this court today to conclude this criminal proceeding by the imposition of sentence. Although I have taken the unusual step of informing you in advance of my inclinations, before imposing sentence, I believe it is important for you, as well as those observing these proceedings, to understand my reasoning for the sentence I am about to impose. The imposition of sentence is one of the most difficult and significant decisions that any criminal court judge is called upon to make. Our legislature sets the parameters for an authorized sentence, but it is a judge that must decide what constitutes a just conclusion to a verdict of guilty. A court is vested with broad discretion in determining what sources or evidence it may consider to arrive at an appropriate sentence. In doing so, the court must consider the facts of the case along with any aggravating or mitigating circumstances. In my time on the bench, I've been called upon to grapple with this weighty responsibility for countless defendants who have been found guilty after trial for an assortment of offenses, ranging from nonviolent Class E felonies to the most heinous of crimes, including homicides, sex trafficking, and child sexual abuse. The task is always difficult and deserving of careful consideration, whether the sentence be an unconditional discharge or incarceration of 25 years to life. However, never before has this court been presented with such a unique and remarkable set of circumstances. Indeed, it can be viewed fairly that this has been a truly extraordinary case. There was unprecedented media attention, public interest, and heightened security involving various agencies. And yet, the trial was a bit of a paradox because once the courtroom doors were closed, the trial itself was no more special, unique, or extraordinary than the other 32 criminal trials that took place in this courthouse at the same exact time. Jury selection was conducted, the same rules of evidence were followed, opening statements were made, witnesses called and cross-examined, evidence presented, summations delivered, the same burden of proof was applied, and a jury made up of ordinary citizens delivered a verdict. And it was all conducted pursuant to the rules of procedure and guided by the law. Of course, part of what made it feel somewhat ordinary was the outstanding work, preparation, and professionalism of the clerks, court officers, court reporters, security personnel, and the entire staff of this building who did their jobs as they would with any other criminal trial. So while one can argue that the trial itself was in many respects somewhat ordinary, the same cannot be said about the circumstances surrounding this sentencing. And that is because of the office you once occupied and which you will soon occupy again. To be sure, it is the legal protections afforded to the office of the President of the United States that are extraordinary, not the occupant of the office. The legal protections, especially within the context of a criminal prosecution, afforded to the office of the President have been laid out by our founders, the Constitution, and most recently interpreted by the United States Supreme Court in the matter of Trump versus the United States, which was decided on July 1st, 2024. As with every other defendant in your position, it is my obligation to consider any and all aggravating and mitigating factors to inform my decision. Some of those aggravating factors have already been articulated in my Sandoval ruling at the start of this trial and by my recent written decisions on December 16th and January 3rd. Thus, they need not be repeated at this time. However, the considerable, indeed, extraordinary legal protections afforded by the office of the chief executive is a factor that overrides all others. To be clear, The protections afforded the office of the president are not a mitigating factor. They do not reduce the seriousness of the crime or justify its commission in any way. The protections are, however, a legal mandate, which pursuant to the rule of law, this court must respect and follow. However, despite the extraordinary breadth of those protections, one power they do not provide is the power to erase a jury verdict. It is clear from legal precedent, which until July 1st was scarce, that Donald Trump, the ordinary citizen, Donald Trump, the criminal defendant, would not be entitled to such considerable protections. I'm referring to protections that extend well beyond those afforded the average defendant who winds their way through the criminal justice system each day. No, ordinary citizens do not receive those legal protections. It is the office of the president that bestows those far-reaching protections to the office holder. And it was the citizenry of this nation that recently decided that you should once again receive the benefits of those protections, which include, among other things, the Supremacy Clause and presidential immunity. It is through that lens and that reality that this court must determine a lawful sentence. After careful analysis, in obedience to governing mandates, and pursuant to the rule of law, this court has determined that the only lawful sentence that permits entry of a judgment of conviction without encroaching upon the highest office in the land is an unconditional discharge, which the New York State Legislature has determined is a lawful and permissible sentence for the crime of falsifying business records in the first degree. Therefore, at this time, I impose that sentence to cover all 34 counts. Sir, I wish you Godspeed as you assume your second term in office. Thank you.
Godspeed it is. You're on mute, Mary and Adam. Adam, you're off mute. Mary, you're on mute.
Yeah, we're all muted. I don't know why. Well, I was muted. Whatever. I was just saying, hearing it was so much worse than reading the transcript. Adam, you joined us while we were listening. Just curious about your thoughts. I do want to take a look at, you know what? Let's take a look at his ranting post first to, I think, just explain why rendering this, or, you know, making this unconditional discharge, I mean, not even a fine. You couldn't fine him $5 or something. I mean, there's something.
Or the money that ABC gave him.
Yeah, like it's like going to allow him to do what he always does, which is rewrite history. So if we could take a look at that post, and I'll read the most, well, it's very long, so I'll just read a bit of it. The radical Democrats have lost another pathetic, un-American witch hunt. After coordinating with the Biden-Harris Department of Injustice and lawless weaponization and bringing completely baseless, illegal, and fake charges against your 45th and 47th president, I was given an unconditional discharge. That result alone proves there is no case. There never was a case. Well, that is exactly how people are going to interpret this who don't really pay attention, right, Adam? Also, just quickly, if Donald is complimenting you on your legal acumen, you might want to quit your day job.
Especially if you're a contributor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was pretty wild that he was quoting Alan Dershowitz and then a dead attorney. So, I mean, you know, that was something. But I did love the slip that you all heard and flagged, Mary, the popularity. I don't think he even knows what the popular vote is.
No, he won the popularity contest. He's the president.
I'm popular.
It was, I think, the most interesting thing that I just heard was sort of that mic drop moment from Judge Merchan, where he basically was talking about, the importance of the office of the president and not the individual.
Right.
I thought that probably hurt him quite a bit, considering the fact that he was on mute and no longer able to speak.
I want to talk because I think it's really important that people understand this whole gag order issue. Donald constantly and erroneously claims that the gag order has prevented him from defending himself in the court of public opinion. But that is not what the gag order is about, right, Adam?
No, I mean, it's kind of like you go back to Ruby and Shay Moss. It's about protecting individuals in the process, and the threats that individuals had on their lives and the disinformation. I mean, the guy just spews lies, right? It's one thing to make your case in the court of public opinion, which does have an impact on cases when you're actually speaking the truth and making your case, but nothing that this guy says is true.
Well, and also it was to protect the lives of the people he was threatening, like
Right.
court officers and prosecutors' families and the judge and jurors and what have you. And Brian, something that I had completely forgotten about until listening to this, he was found in contempt of court on at least 10 separate occasions, and no punishment for that either.
I think the key takeaway as I listened to the judge go, whether it's unconditional dismissal or 25 years to life, at that point in time, you kind of realize exactly what Donald Trump would have been facing had he not been President Donald Trump. He would have been facing time. Now, 25 to life, I don't know. But what I take away from all this is I listened to it again, and after reading the text, was that Donald Trump is going into office without, I'll bottom line it this way. What's the over under on how many times he gets indicted or impeached in this new term? And I guess it depends roughly on how long he lasts in this new term. He wished him Godspeed. Judge Merchan wished him Godspeed. And I think Judge Merchan takes more seriously the law and the letter of the law and the rule of law than Donald Trump does. And I think it completely sailed over.
Absolutely nothing.
Yeah, you're right. But I think it completely sailed over Donnie's head, the what's going to happen and what is at stake in the next 4 years. And that's, to me, the most chilling part of it is he will never get it. He doesn't care. He doesn't get it. He has no idea. The idea of blaming, the fires in LA on the verdict in that court, there's just no connection between the two. And the fact that he is and just sat there and pontificated in typical Donald Trump fashion just shows how damn clueless he is. Every time this man opens his mouth, it boils me to no end that people do not understand that this man has no concept. But of course, if you don't have a concept, the Dunning-Kruger effect, if you're that stupid, you don't know how stupid you are. Donald Trump is a living embodiment of that, and it doesn't portend good things for the next 4 years. This going into, just think about it, guys. Going in to the presidency is a convicted felon. Not only a convicted felon, but an unrepentant convicted felon. Not only an unrepentant convicted felon, but a convicted felon who gave away state secrets. Not only did he give away state secrets, he doesn't care about anybody but himself. Not only does he not care about anybody but himself, but he doesn't care. Everything is transactional in that operational mindset of his. It's all going to be about money, transactions. You're screwed, blued, and tattooed. Congratulations. You did it. The voters who voted him in, you're getting what you wanted.
And listen, Adam, the original sentencing date was in July. Actually, I think were you in New York when he was convicted?
I actually left seeing you that morning.
That's right. The conviction was handed down the day after you left to go back down to DC. So, but
July, I was on a
train
as I arrived at Union Station. The jury came back, so I had seen you that morning, which was just wild.
That's right, and. We felt really good about it because finally, but given everything, even if there had been sentencing in July, it wouldn't have mattered, because look at everything else he's gotten away with. I'm beginning to think that nothing would have mattered at this point. I don't mean to sound cynical. I'm just trying to like wrap my head around where we are in terms of Americans' relationship to the rule of law, why people seem not to care. But also, just like, as for Donald as an individual, one thing we know about him is he totally understands the difference between right or wrong. He just doesn't think the rules should apply to him because he's so special. But Adam, when you listen to Todd Blanche, who I guess determined that it was worth whatever he's getting to sell what little is left of his soul, just lying in a courtroom about the majority of the American people this and the majority of the American people that, like, why should Donald not be deluded about the reality of the situation around him?
Yeah, I mean, Todd Blanche is so fucking smug. I think you're right. I mean, maybe none of it mattered, but what would have changed the trajectory would have been if voters had delivered on election day, and they didn't. And that was the whole purpose of this 4-year campaign that he ran, right? It was a grift, and it was protection from the law, and no one could predict the outcome. And none of us, I think, in late October, were sort of necessarily feeling like this was going to be the outcome, but this was just a huge fucking disappointment. And at the end of the day, it does fall in the hands of not all voters, but the voters that supported this guy. And the rest of us are left cleaning up this mess. I mean, I know you're going to talk about it more on your live later, but there's news out now that he's trying to get his hotel back in Washington, D.C. It's the same old fucking story and playbook, except this time it's going to be worse, because they're just going to build upon everything that they did in the past and try to tear apart the government and the civil service and so forth. And it's scary. It's disappointing. But hopefully it's a fucking wake up call. And I'm glad that Donald Trump mentioned who he mentioned, because maybe that will wake up a couple people on TV too. I mean, that's not a good look for these folks.
Yeah. I'm sorry, but I was just going to say the idea if Donald Trump gets on TV and says, or is it smug little attorney goes, the majority of American people. Guess what, folks? The rule of law, even if you're in the singularity, if you're one person and you're right, that's what matters. A majority of dunces does not. The rule of law does not count on the popularity of the person being tried. The rule of law is the rule of law. And every time I hear that stupid argument coming out of his frothy little filthy mouth, I want to just smack him sideways. This is not what the rule of law is about. A minority of one can be in the right, and it's still right. Just because a bunch of morons don't agree with you doesn't make them right. It just makes it a bunch of morons.
Even if they won the popularity vote.
Even if they won the
all right, I gotta go. Now. I'll see you guys soon. Love you guys.
All right, thanks, Adam.
Bye.
Okay, we're gonna wrap up because the proceedings are at an end. The only
I love you, Gary. I don't know how you do it.
I don't. The takeaway, the incoming president is a convicted felon as of today, found guilty on 34 criminal counts by a jury of his peers back in May of 2024. Sentencing delayed because the corrupt, illegitimate supermajority of the Supreme Court needed time to make sure that Donald and Donald alone would never be held accountable for anything because of his presidential, pre-presidential, and post-presidential immunity for forever and ever. Amen. And what we also have to remember, which corporate media has completely forgotten, is before today, Donald Trump was an adjudicated rapist. He was an adjudicated business fraud to the tune of almost $500 million. He still owes to New York State. That case is still on appeal. He was, until recently, out on bail in 4 separate jurisdictions. I do not know how we will ever wrap our heads around the extent to which things always break this guy's way. But here we are. Brian, do you think that the corporate media will be able to remember for the next 10 days that this happened?
Nope.
Or will it just be, hey, don't look back, look forward? I mean, you know how we'll tell? We'll tell by how many seats there are in the Democratic side of things. Next week.
I think you just throw a squirrel in front of the TV camera and that'll get our attention. Squirrel. That's all it's gonna be, man. Short attention span theater is the way we operate.
Yeah. Anyway, a lot of people joined us today, so thanks. We're really glad we're able to get this up. Thank you so much to Mercedes, who did the heavy lifting. Yeah, Scotland hates Trump, not you, Mary. I know, I love Scotland, so please, thank you for exempting me from that. In fact, I may look into moving into a little croft somewhere in Scotland if things keep going south. Just kidding. We're here for the duration. So Brian, it was great to have you as well. Adam Parkhomenko joined us for a bit. And it was interesting to hear the video. The quality definitely improved after the first couple of minutes. And I think it just makes the case for cameras in the courtroom. It definitely makes a difference in all sorts of ways. Just last thing, like, I don't know, Donald seemed a little low energy to me.
Well, Donald, he can't
And
be
whining,
either.
obviously. But
he's going to whine until when they put him in the grave, they're going to have to make sure he's not, he'll get up 5 months later and complain about it, how tight a space he's in. But this is the worst I've ever had. Donald is trending downward. They went after Biden for his problems and his lack of energy and mental decline. But Donald Trump, I witnessed it in the first 4 years. This ain't going better. It ain't going to get better. I think his energy will trend low. I predict he'll be in the office from Tuesdays to Thursdays. Thursday night, he'll go to Mar-a-Lago. He'll play golf. He'll be back late Monday night. He'll be in the office for a couple hours a day. We won't see him as much as we used to see him. We'll see him, in chopper talk for 5 minutes so he could say he's a man of the people. I'm there.
I think executive time is going to be executive day.
Yeah.
We're going to he'll pop out at after the sun sets for a few minutes.
And he'll sign
there's a helicopter.
He'll just sit there and sign whatever they put in front of him, and we're screwed, blued, and tattooed.
Yeah. And I think it's also, Adam alluded to this, and I think it's worth mentioning that, they have a running start here. This is not like January 2017, when there were other people, not sycophants in the executive branch. The team is in place, and they're in a much better position than they were in 2021. Yes. Thank you, Merrick Garland. So, yep. Interesting times. I'd like to be bored.
How many times do you think he'll get impeached this time around?
0 until the Democrats get the majority of the House. How can he get impeached?
I think he'll get impeached. Well, they can bring up articles of impeachment. He won't be found guilty, but I think they'll at least twice.
I listen, here's hoping, but again, unless and until the Democrats get 60 senators in the Senate, which I think is statistically impossible given the demographics. That is the upside though of annexing Canada. Canada will be a very large blue state.
Blame Canada.
All right, everybody. Again, thanks all you Twitter people for joining us. Thanks to our crew, our moderators, our super stickers, everybody watching. You guys are amazing. And just a reminder, please subscribe to the channel. After you subscribe, just click that bell. You'll get notified every time new videos drop. I just started a new show this week. It's very original. It's called Marry Trump Live.
You're live?
Yeah, I know, right? Yes, Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern. I'll be doing that tonight. There is a lot going on. And sorry, Brian, your reverse shot coming out tomorrow?
Reverse shot will be coming out this week. I had to take a little time off to evacuate.
Slacker? I mean, what excuse could you possibly have? Oh yeah, wildfires. Yeah, so we'll keep you posted for when reverse shot comes out. And again, we got lots of new content coming your way. It's in addition, I've got live Ask Mary Anything Within Reason Sunday at 6 p.m. So everybody have an amazing weekend. I'll see you later. And Brian and I and the nerds will be with you next Tuesday. In the meantime, everybody, please stay safe and be kind. Take it easy.